Hello. Hi. Like Brian said, welcome to the 2023 Morrison Lecture. I'm Brooke Tessler, the Executive Director of the VCC Foundation. Just a little bit about us. Our mission is to support and further the constitutional charge of the Vieux Carré Commission, which is to preserve and protect the invaluable historic architectural heritage of New Orleans French Quarter. We do this in a number of ways through projects and programming like the Vieux Carré Historic District Design Guidelines, the Vieux Carré Virtual Library, and hosting educational programming focused on materials conservation and maintenance, and so many more other things. The Vieux Carré is an important part of our heritage and economy. As a membership-based organization, it is literally my job to encourage you to join us and support our efforts. I am one of 3 co-hosts for the biannual Jacob Haight and Mary Meek's Morrison Memorial Lecture. This series of lectures addresses topics in historic preservation and honors 2 longtime Vieux Carré residents who were tireless advocates for the neighborhood's preservation. Beginning in the 1930s and for decades following, the couple was in the vanguard of advancing preservation legislation and raising public awareness about preservation-related issues. Past lectures have included experts from National Geographic, the National Center for Preservation, Technology, and Training, and the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, tackling topics such as managing change in historic districts, sustainable tourism, infill in historic districts, and 21st century preservation technology. We hope you will enjoy today's program. We've worked very hard on it all year long. Now I'm going to turn it over to one of my co-hosts and partners in preservation, Erin Holmes.
Thank you, Brooke. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Erin Holmes. I'm the Executive Director of the Vieux Carré Property Owners, Residents, and Associates, or VCPORA for short. We are an 85-year-old historic preservation nonprofit that advocates for the preservation and protection of the Vieux Carré as an international historic treasure, a major cultural and economic asset, and a living residential neighborhood. In short, we work to maintain a livability, a quality of life, and a quality of experience for residents, businesses, workers, and visitors in an incredibly dense, complex, and beautiful historic neighborhood. So our last Morrison Lecture was held in 2018. I recognize some of you from that event. We featured Costas Christ, a world-renowned sustainable tourism expert. We were also set to have another lecture in 2020, but 2020 had its own plans. The pandemic stopped the world in its tracks, halting all travel. Every major city was hit hard, particularly those with an economic dependency and reliance on tourism. But in those agonizingly unpredictable times, we saw cities begin to notice changes. They noticed differences in their own landscapes and explored new priorities for when they reopened their doors. We all saw the headlines. Dolphins spotted in the Venetian canals. I'd like to think that those dolphins inspired such changes as the following prohibition on cruise ships in the city center. We, VCPORA, began a documentary project about the COVID impact here. We captured stories from and experiences from local residents, culture bearers, musicians, business owners. That project, which is titled Wasted: Over Tourism in the French Quarter, is ongoing, and I'd like to invite you to visit our website so you can view some of the shorts that we have produced. We are actively fundraising for this project as well. Now, 3 years later, we thought it was only appropriate to revisit the topic of tourism through this new lens of resurgence and rejuvenation. Our goal is to examine these changes, some considered radical, as an opportunity for the city of New Orleans and its own recovery story. And now I'd like to pass the spotlight to another co-host and preservation partner, Mr. Daniel Hammer of the Historic New Orleans Collection.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Historic New Orleans Collection. I'm Daniel Hammer. I'm the collection's president and CEO. And I'd like to start off by just saying thank you to our longtime and cherished partners at VCPORA and the Vieux Carré Commission Foundation, and especially to Brooke and Aaron for all of your hard work with us to put this program together. Before I introduce our speaker, Simon Woodward, I'd like to say a few words, or our first speaker, Simon Woodward, I'd like to say a few words about preservation and why we do what we do at the Historic New Orleans Collection that I believe are relevant to today's program. As most of you in this audience probably know, preservation in New Orleans was born in the French Quarter in the early 20th century and brought about the development of the modern tourism industry in the post-war era. Today, New Orleans is known around the world by hundreds of millions of people. For most of these people, New Orleans is an idea, and the picture of that idea is the French Quarter. Locally as well, everybody knows the French Quarter, but what people know it as differs. For some it is beautiful, for some it is dirty. For some it is historic, for some it is dangerous. For some it is resonant, for some it is inaccessible. For everyone, though, essentially it is a metaphor for what they think New Orleans is itself. Good, bad, or more often than not, both. For us, preservationists, planners, business leaders, thought leaders, the takeaway from this history is that whatever we want New Orleans to be, the French Quarter needs to be able to be that, at least for a significant number of people. If we want New Orleans to be a thriving, complex, and diverse city, then the French Quarter must also be complex and diverse. If the Quarter is allowed to continue to develop into a space of singular use, tourism and service only to tourists, New Orleans will never find the path to thriving in its diversity and complexity. As a museum director, I see opportunity to affect this by increasing the accessibility and relevance of museum activities and raising the profile of museums in the French Quarter. Museums can attract and engage tourists and engage and increase the quality of life of locals. They support the education of our school kids. They enrich the lives of our local families. And they bring in additional local actors to be active in the places they are located. Local schools, universities, and nonprofits are museums' program partners. Local businesses are their sponsors and work with them to entertain and engage their stakeholders. Do you realize that if only 5% of annual visitors to the French Quarter visited French Quarter museums, that those museums would be the most visited museums in our city and among the most visited museums in the nation? Imagine the spillover effect of this on the entire city, how it could uplift the museums and cultural institutions throughout New Orleans, big and small, and the positive developments in tourism and quality of life for residents that it could catalyze. This is what motivates the Historic New Orleans Collection to invest in growth, why we employ 150 New Orleans culture and history professionals in the French Quarter, why we are working hard to partner with others all over the city to expand our relevance and stakeholdership, and why we have invested tens of millions of dollars into creating of our historic French Quarter buildings through preservation, welcoming, accessible, dynamic attractions, and why we will continue to partner with our community, invest in our buildings, and expand our relevance, attractiveness, and accessibility, and our sustainability. The purpose of preservation is to make it possible for our city to thrive in the future. I mentioned partnership, and it is important to note that the Historic New Orleans Collection does not and cannot do this work alone. The collection will never have 1 million visitors a year. We don't have the space. French Quarter museums are working together to make the Quarter a museum-going space. The French Quarter Museum Association, made up of the collection, the Herman Grimma-Gallier Historic Houses, BK House and Gardens, the Ursuline Convent Museum, the New Orleans Pharmacy Museum, the Louisiana State Museum, the Friends of the Cabildo, and the Louisiana Museum Foundation, is a coalition committed to positioning its museums as an integral part of everyone's French Quarter experience. Thanks to a 2023 Greater New Orleans Foundation planning grant, the FQMA is poised to begin in 2024 to engage partners in helping to raise awareness for the French Quarter as a place to visit museums. We are certain that by working together, we can achieve the outcome of millions of French Quarter museum visitors every year. and that there is no greater way to make our tourism industry more sustainable and expand the scope of benefit that it brings to the people of our city. So thank you for listening to that. And I would now like... And I'd now like to introduce our first and keynote speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Simon Woodward. Simon has spent the last 35 years working as a consultant, lecturer, and researcher in the field of cultural and heritage tourism. Based in the United Kingdom, he has advised public, private, and third sector clients in many parts of the world and helped prepare tourism strategies, management plans, and development plans for heritage destinations worldwide. For almost 15 years, Simon was a key member of the team at Leeds Beckett University, where he taught responsible tourism management. He is former chair of the ICOMOS UK Cultural Tourism Committee and a trustee of 2 heritage NGOs in the north of England. In 2022, he co-authored the book World Heritage Site, Concepts, Management, and Conservation. The text explores the contemporary challenges facing such properties, including climate change, over-tourism, and the need to balance public access with resource conservation, issues that, of course, are relevant to many other destinations as well. Please help me welcome Simon Woodward.
Good afternoon, and just trying to decide if it's slightly less intimidating if I take my glasses off. Obviously, I'd like to thank the organisers of today's event for inviting me out here. It's actually my second visit to New Orleans. I came here on vacation 10 years ago with my wife and a couple of friends. But I was reflecting this morning, and I've only been here about 36 hours, but last trip, I only spoke, I think, to one New Orleans resident. I just viewed it very much as a superficial tourist experience, whereas I've already had the chance to speak to many people from the city and about the city. And I think, to me, that's one of the joys of tourism, of travel, is not just seeing places, but meeting people. So, as I say, I'm very honoured to have been given the opportunity to talk to you today. And I'd also like to thank you all for coming out and giving up your Saturday afternoon when I'm sure there was gardening or TV or chores or something else that you could have been doing. So the purpose of public lectures like this is to entertain a little. Hopefully you will be entertained. Shed light on an issue that some of you will be very, very familiar with. Maybe challenge your thinking a little bit. But at the end, the idea is to help you see an issue a little bit more clearly, a little bit more concisely. And so I promise that at the end of the lecture, you will see that image on the right of the screen a little bit more clearly. So in terms of about me, born, raised in the northeast of England, about 200 miles north of London, in a little cathedral city called Durham. We do also have a French connection, goes back a little bit longer than yours does. After the Normans invaded in 1066, they moved north and built this beautiful cathedral and castle, which is now a World Heritage site. I trained as a geographer and as an economist, so I've always been interested in the interaction between people and places. As you've heard, I've got a long career in cultural and heritage tourism, been working as a university lecturer until recently, and I'm still doing consultancy work. Just finished work in Indonesia on a new national park plan. And very excitingly, I was part of the team that prepared the new tourism strategy for Upper Egypt between Abu Simbel temples all the way down to Aswan, Luxor, and Kennet. So basically, as 4-year-old Simon can show you here, I've been jumping around on heritage buildings most of my life. So what am I going to talk about today? Very briefly about the impact of the pandemic on tourism destinations generally. I'm going to remind us all of the call that went out to build back better, build tourism back better. Briefly look at what's happening now, and then think about how we might tackle some of the challenges in the future. So I want to start, and again, you'll realize that parts of this presentation are very, very personal. So my first brush with the pandemic, 13th of March, it was a Friday, 2020. My wife and I flew out to Palma, Mallorca to celebrate my 60th birthday that day. And we had a lovely afternoon wandering around the historic centre, looking at beautiful architecture, great meal at Mark Foch's restaurant that evening. And we planned to do lots of sightseeing on the Saturday. We went out. We first stopped the cathedral. We get to the cathedral and there's a sign, sorry, the cathedral is closed because of the current public health situation. No problem, I said to my wife, because I know the city quite well. I take the students there on field trips. We'll go to one of the art galleries. We turn up at the art gallery. There's a sign there. Sorry, due to the public health problems, we're closed for the foreseeable future. Okay, well, at least we can get a cup of coffee. So we're sitting in a cafe, and the waiters come out and they start moving the tables to create the spaces that were then already required for social distancing. So it became obvious by lunchtime that something big was happening. We got back to the hotel and there's a sign, sorry, because of new government regulations, you're going to have to stay in your hotel room. Room service will be available to you. You can pop out to a supermarket if you wish, but that's it. You've got to stay in your room. So by late afternoon, that is the view from my hotel room. The streets are empty. It happened so quickly. What also happened was my cell phone started ringing. I had lots and lots of students out on placement. Katie here, doing work with the Mouse down in Florida. Connor on placement at a country club in West Palm Beach, and various other bits. And they were all ringing me saying, Simon, Katie was saying, Disney have said they're shutting the park tonight. We've got to be out of our accommodation and on a plane home on Monday. What are we going to do? And this was obviously reflected all over the world. March, lockdown, massive relocation of people very, very quickly. And what was the impact it had on the tourism sector? Within a year, a 1 billion drop in international tourism arrivals. Airlines, over the course of the following 2 years, 2020, 21, carried 5 billion fewer passengers, and they lost $700 billion US. So the impact on the aviation sector, as we know, was immense. The hotel sector, average occupancy rates around the world dropped from 60, 70% down to the 20s, 30s, 40s. And a decent hotel needs a rate of at least 65, 70% to operate viably. So massive impact on all the different component parts in the tourism supply chain. So what were tourism managers doing? Well, they were tearing their hair out. But they realized very quickly, it's no good just to feel sorry for ourselves. And the call came out from the World Tourism Organization and the UN. There is no time to waste. Let us rethink and reinvent tourism and together deliver a more sustainable, prosperous, and resilient future for all. So it was a real call to arms, which is great. And over the subsequent few months, we saw lots and lots of documentation coming out from organizations like the World Tourism Organization. How are we going to recover? Global guidelines to restart tourism. A one planet vision for a responsible recovery of the tourism sector. To recovery and beyond. Somebody watching too much Toy Story, I think, from the WTTC. Building a resilient recovery from the OECD. So all of the major international organizations with an interest in tourism and its contribution to economic and social development around the world were keen to press forward and say, okay, now's the time to take stock. So if you look through these documents, there are a number of common themes that come out. The need to protect jobs, generate revenue somehow for the sector, make sure there's enough liquidity in the system, build consumer confidence in destinations so that when lockdowns restrictions were lifted, people felt confident about traveling again. And that required partnerships between the accommodation sector, travel sector, attractions, but also public health providers, local authorities, municipalities. So again, it was interesting that it was a real call to action that relied on partnership. Another common theme calls for innovation and sustainability to be the so-called new normal. And finally, we saw this time and time again, use the time to reflect, review, and build back better. I use this image of my wife and our dog on vacation. We were able, between lockdowns, to get to France for a few weeks in August 2020. And even though she's outside, this visitor attraction, it was a historic abbey, required its visitors to wear masks. And that was interesting. And now I know mask wearing was contentious in some quarters, but it became a very visible indicator to consumers that wherever you were was taking your health seriously. But it also demonstrates to me the fact that you can't require people to wear masks if there isn't somewhere for them to get masks. So again, it demonstrates this creation of relationships between the tourism sector, public health, and so on. So where are we now, 3 years on? This statement came out a few weeks ago from the World Tourism Organization. Global tourism is on track to return to pre-pandemic levels by the end of the year. By investing in people and projects that make a difference, we can deliver on the sector's potential to drive growth and opportunity for all. What's interesting to me, what's missing from that statement is anything about building back better, building back differently. We're back to growth, growth, growth. So, just a few statistics to demonstrate what's happening. Yes, this just shows that one of the measures, the Global Travel Health Index, shows that for the last couple of months, we've been above 2019 levels. There's evidence that all the usual destinations, the popular destinations, are once again at the top of people's agendas when they're looking for destinations. Paris, London, Rome, Bangkok, New York, so on and so forth, Bali. In terms of the US, TSA is reporting your travel volumes are back to pre-pandemic levels, finally. But what's also interesting is that your international tourism hasn't quite built back. So if TSA levels are similar to pre-pandemic, but international tourism isn't, that implies there is more domestic tourism happening within the US at the moment, which obviously for destinations like New Orleans is a good thing. People have decided travel is more important to them. Lots and lots of surveys are saying, since the pandemic, do you think it's more or less important to travel? People are saying more important, and particularly those in higher income groups, which is great if we're looking at promoting high-value tourism. In terms of looking at recent holiday taking habits, vacation taking habits, this is a survey of US consumers, just showing that particularly people in higher income brackets are taking more and more holidays. So there seems to be this pent-up demand for tourism since the pandemic. And just one other graph, because I know we'll come back to this issue time and time again. Short-term rentals, the supply of short-term rental accommodation is escalating considerably. It now represents something like 14% of the global tourist accommodation stock. But in the US, it's close to 19%. And as we all know, that has particular implications for destinations. So summing things up, where we are now, 11% of countries are already at pre-pandemic levels, 28% expected to hit it by the rest of the year, and almost everybody else within the next year or two. So what does this mean for destinations? And here's one destination that will get very busy next year, the American Cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer in Normandy, because obviously next year is the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Sadly, as this image from a Mediterranean town shows, that not everybody's happy with the way tourism has bounced back. And I'm just going to show you a selection of newspaper headings and cuttings. This European country has hit the red line with the tourist crowd. Inhabitants of the Belgian city of Bruges just say summertime capacity, we've had enough. Here's another one. St Ives, a very popular tourist destination in Cornwall, the southwest of England, now described as hell on earth because it's just so busy. Not only are there lots of tourists in some places, but they're behaving badly. Swiss tourist filmed carving her initials in the Colosseum. Tourists branded as imbeciles for destroying a €200 Italian statue. This was a group of German guys, got drunk, climbed up on the statue to take a photo. Somebody stumbled and broke it. Calls for action after this was a Canadian teen vandalizes a Japanese temple. This was a couple of weeks ago. 2 American lads got a little bit drunk, got into a bit of the Eiffel Tower they shouldn't have done, and spent the night there. Tourists are also being more demanding, not only by behaving badly. There's a town in Italy where the tourists complained that the church bells, which used to chime right through the night on the hour, was disrupting their sleep. And so the church has said, okay, well, tourism is important, so we'll just stop chiming the bells. Local residents have no right to complain about annoying tourists, claim a holidaymaker. We're seeing lots of these stories in the press. But also what's interesting, beginning to pick up stories of how citizens and communities are beginning to fight back in ways. So this, again, is another small tourist town in Cornwall in southwest England. Our picturesque seaside town was being ruined by posh tourists, but we got our revenge. Here's how we kept them away. And it was all to do with surveillance camera footage and reporting people to the police and so on. I'm sick of posh tourists taking over my town, so I'm taking drastic action with my own property to keep them out. This is somebody who was being pressured to put her property on Airbnb, but she said, no, I don't want the kind of Airbnb tourists who we see in my town to rent my place, so she's actually rented it out on a long-term lease to a local. This is a great example of citizen action. Mallorca, one of the Balearic Islands. Beach closed signs installed to keep tourists away from popular spots. So, caution, falling rocks. Kaya Muerta, and the implication is it's a 1-hour walk to the beach. It's actually only 10 minutes. The one in the middle, beach closed, but in Catalan underneath, it actually says the beach is still open. Beware of dangerous jellyfish. And you can't read the text underneath, but it's brilliant. It actually says, again, Playa Oberta, so the beach is open, but, sorry, I have to read this, ni guiris, ni medusa, but not to turnips and not to jellyfish. And it took me a moment to realize that turnips is obviously their slang word for British tourists, because if you think of the color that we go when we've been in the sun too long. So they're fighting back, and it's not just citizens, but municipalities are also getting in on the act. Fed up with over-tourism, European hotspots impose bans, fines, taxes. So here we have, Mallorca, up to €3,000 fines for certain antisocial behavior. Santiago de Compostela, at the end of the Camino de Santiago, the pilgrimage route, wants to introduce a tourist tax to prevent uncontrolled tourism. Amsterdam bans cruise ships. We'll hear a little bit about Amsterdam later on, but partly to limit visitors. Bali, they've introduced a telephone hotline so that people seeing bad behavior can ring the hotline and report that behavior, and they'll then get the authorities sent out. So basically, it looks like we are back to over-tourism in key destinations. Tourism has bounced back very quickly in some parts of the world. And there are these conflicts between residents and tourists. And in the academic literature on tourism, increasingly, they're referred to as hosts and guests, but there may be a bit of irony in that. I'm sure all of you who live in the French Quarter here, you possibly don't sometimes feel like you're hosting the kind of tourists that you want to. But these conflicts are over access to accommodation, over access to resources, about the experience that tourists are looking for on the one hand and residents want on the other. And this is always then exacerbated by poor or inappropriate behavior by tourists. And because of this, as I said, we're seeing communities are beginning to fight back. And municipal governments and the trade is also being pressured to respond. So why has this happened? What can we do about it? First thing to remember for those of you who don't work in tourism, is that tourism is a perishable good. You can only sell a seat on an airline flight on the 9th of September between New Orleans and, I don't know, Philadelphia or whatever, once. You can only sell that seat once, so you're under incredible pressure to sell it. Similarly, if you've got 200-300 hotel rooms, you want to fill as many as you can tonight because you can never get another opportunity to sell them on the 9th of September. So there has been amongst the trade this incredible pressure to generate revenue as quickly as possible and as much revenue as possible. And just as an indication of the impact that the loss of revenue has had on a destination, last year I was fortunate enough to lead the team writing the new tourism strategy for Bethlehem in Palestine. And when we started our fieldwork January last year, we found 30% of hotels in the town were up for sale by the owners. Bethlehem's quite unique in that almost all of the hotels there are family-owned, generally quite small, 30, 40, 50 rooms. And with the very restrictive controls that the Israelis put on access into Israel and then into the West Bank and Palestine, it meant for 18 months a lot of these businesses just had no income at all. So, we must look at things from the tourism sector's point of view, and that, they're desperate to sell their products. So why more conflict? Is it effectively revenge? I wasn't able to go away for 2 or 3 years, so I want to go away now, and I want to behave like exactly like I can. Or is some of this conflict also because host communities had a couple of years where there wasn't much tourism or even any tourism? And they kind of liked it. They got used to having their city back. I live in a historic city called York in the north of England now. We get 7 million tourists a year. And I can tell you, it was lovely. And I feel really guilty as a tourism professional saying that. It was great with no tourists, but it was. I read an interview with Italian head of police recently, and he was asked about these issues. And his view was tourists are behaving as they've always behaved. It's just that this year, their numbers have returned to what they were pre-pandemic. That corresponds to an increase in boorish behavior. In other words, we're just seeing it, but we're not, we forgot about it, it's come back, and now we want to do something about it. So, if we want to do something about it, we need the tools to do something about it. This is the academic bit. I was told I could do a little academic bit if I treated you like second-year undergraduate students. In other words, I introduce the concept, and then if you're interested, you go and read some more. The exception to that are the 13 students from Tulane's Masters in Historical Preservation. You'll get the essay title at the end and a full list of references, and I expect it on my desk on Friday. I'm joking. Or am I? So, 3 concepts: liminal space, social proof, and destination image. Liminal space, this comes from the Latin limen, which means threshold. And in tourism, we use it to refer to places of transition between one place, one state, I don't mean state as in Louisiana or Florida or whatever, and another, where quite often there is no perceived ownership. And we don't always understand how we're supposed to behave there. We feel free of certain controls, and our moral perceptions of what's appropriate in these spaces alter. As an example of this is an image I took from the internet, which allegedly shows a Saudi tourist driving a Maserati down the Spanish Steps in Rome. Now, I don't move in the kind of circles where people have Maseratis, so, it could be a Volkswagen Golf for all I know. But the point is, somebody felt able to behave in a way that most of us would feel inappropriate, because they either didn't understand or refused to acknowledge the correct way of behaving in that liminal space. There's this concept of social proof, where we're always looking to others to govern how we behave. And particularly the more and more social media output we see, we want validation from others. I'm sure most of you have got social media accounts of some kind, and you know, some people will say, oh, if it's not on Instagram, it didn't really happen. But you know, we see images like this, and then we all want to recreate this, not necessarily in front of St. Peter's, but you know, we go to the places that we've seen on social media, and we, you know, look at how people have behaved, and we follow their guidelines. And the third concept, destination image, the sum of beliefs, ideas, impressions that a person has of a destination. And Daniel mentioned that we all have different ways of looking at the French Quarter, and it's based on our own experience, our own exposure to different information sources. But from a tourism point of view, it's important because it influences our selection of destinations. Do we want to go to that place? Is it attractive to us the way we perceive it? And then when we're there, what do we want to experience? And whilst we're there, is it matching up to our expectations? And are we therefore likely to come back? So this is where for the next 2 minutes, you all become my therapist and you learn about my troubled youth. Excuse me. So how did I learn about New Orleans? This was the fun part to prepare. First thing I'm conscious of is this song, House of the Rising Sun. Interestingly, next year is 60 years since it was first released, so I'm sure there's opportunities for some kind of celebration. But I remember, certainly by the age of 10 or 11, so this is 1970, 71, singing this song around a campfire with the Boy Scouts. And you all know the lyrics and you know what it's about. So, a few years later, I get into rock music. A friend of my dad's gives me this album by the Doobie Brothers called Toulouse Street, which is great. And if you know this, the album, there's a song Pat Simmons singing about he's locked in a room in New Orleans, his head's beating fast, and he can hear the Creole girls singing. But also, if you, and particularly looking at the gentleman of my age in the room, if you had the album in the gatefold sleeve, you'll remember when you opened it out, there was another picture of the band in the company of several young women, all of whom seemed to have forgotten to get dressed that morning. And I found out later that it was actually shot, the pictures were shot in an old brothel. Around about the same time, this movie comes out, Live and Let Die. And so, first James Bond movie I was ever allowed to go see, the cinema, great. But again, this is how I'm getting my impressions of New Orleans. A few years later, I sneak into an art house cinema and I finally get to see Easy Rider. And we know the scene set in Cemetery No. 1. So what does 18-year-old Simon think New Orleans is? Simon, he thinks it's sex, drugs, rock and roll, a little bit of voodoo. And remember, I'm a small-town boy from the north of England, and that is my image of your destination for so long. It does change. I go to college. I share accommodation the first year with an older guy, PhD student, who introduces me to Dr. John. A few years later, the lovely Linda Ronstadt, sadly not personally, introduces me to Aaron Neville, and through that I've sort of learned about the Neville brothers. So I'm broadening my understanding of your destination. A few years later still, I get into country music, and I hear Nancy Griffith singing about a poncho train. What on earth's a poncho train? And eventually I look at the lyrics and poncho train, and I get an atlas, and I realize it's... So I don't want you to think that all I do is listen to music and watch movies. I read, honestly. And as my career started taking off, and I started earning a bit of money, I would start coming to the US with my wife on holiday every year. And I'd like to buy travel books, because travel writing, rather than guidebooks, they give a better understanding of the people who live in a destination. So here's just a few samples of some of the books I've got, and they're talking about New Orleans. And we're talking Streets of Enchantment, banana trees growing in red brick fountain courtyards, and so on. Irma Kurtz, different view. Oh, it was a honeymoon town, but now it's dangerous. I'm glad I'm not saying, I'm glad I'm going straight on to Biloxi. Nick Middleton here. I never met anyone who doesn't like the French Quarter. It's a 24-hour party zone. Interesting perception there, because he's implying it isn't just Bourbon Street, it's the whole of the French Quarter, which I'm sure you guys would disagree with. Here's another one, and he's talking about the food and the drink and the architecture, but also the smells. So when we talk about how people get their destination images, the media has a lot to answer for. We're not always just perusing the marketing materials put out by destination management organizations. We're getting our ideas from lots of other places. And social media, as I said earlier, is complicating things even more, because that is uncontrolled in terms of the images that are being presented to us of destinations. So, there's a number of issues. How do we reconcile tourist expectations with the host community? How do we change tourist behavior, particularly in these so-called liminal spaces? And can we adjust, or should we adjust, or try to adjust a destination's image, maybe to attract different markets? And this is where regenerative tourism comes in. So regenerative tourism takes as its starting point, as all tourism does, that we need to contribute to economic development and social development, and it should be across the whole destination. We need to protect the interest of local communities, including the conservation of the natural and the cultural environments which shapes their lives. Because effectively that is what you are selling to tourists. And it's also based on the principles that all stakeholders must be involved in the planning and the management of tourism, and therefore it becomes time-consuming. And it butts up, sometimes quite uncomfortably, with this need for the tourism sector to sell their bed spaces and their airline tickets and their coach seats and whatever else today. They're focusing on that. They need the revenue and they need the liquidity, and maybe can't give as much time to thinking about the long term as we'd like. So in terms of reconciling hosts and guests, we need to make sure that tourists are conscious of the impacts they're having and how to behave. We need to remove this conflict over access to resources, including housing. We need to manage not just the liminal space, but what we call the front space and the back space. The front space, that bit of your destination you are happy to share with tourists, and the back space, the bits of your destination that you want to keep for yourselves. And there's a need particularly to develop more community-based tourism, so that everybody within a destination has the opportunity to benefit. So I promise this is the final academic bit, behavior change wheel. Basically, it's a really useful structure for you to think about the different approaches in terms of what types of intervention you want to introduce in response to whatever challenge you're facing, and whether that's going to be legislative or managerial or planning or whatever else. So just a few ideas here then. Changing tourist behavior. How you provide information, how you provide guidance is really, really important. I'm fortunate enough to do quite a lot of work with Seabourn Cruises as one of their onboard speakers. And, this is just a small sign, but it's, please show respect to the ocean and the law. So it's reminding you that you're not just being a good citizen, you're actually, if you do chuck something over the side, you are breaking maritime law. This is from a resort owned by the Tata Corporation in India. There is a particularly all-you-can-eat buffets, a temptation quite often for people to say lots and lots of food and not eat it all. So here's just a gentle reminder, of how much waste the guests at the hotel had left, and it could have fed 180 people. So, just tugging a little bit at people's morals there. This is a poster that's appeared in the Croatian city of Split this year. You're walking through the city of a Roman emperor, act like he's at home. Now, Diocletian died a long, long time ago. But in there is guidance, and excuse me, I need to read these. Basically, if you're drinking alcohol, keep it in the bars, not in the streets. Do not go shirtless in the town. Keep your beachwear for the beach. Use the toilets, not the palace walls. And if you want to shout, go to Polyud. Now, Polyud is the stadium where the local soccer team, Hajduk Split, play. And I was just thinking, is obviously the fact they're promoting that as an opportunity to tourists means it's easier to get tickets there than it is to go and see the Saints. And good luck tomorrow against Tennessee. So, you can use ways of communicating with visitors to get them to reflect on their behavior. I was in Sucre, Bolivia, earlier this year, and I was looking out the window of the cafe I was in, and suddenly I saw this, and I thought, first, is it altitude sickness? Am I hallucinating? Have I walked onto the set of a live-action remake of Madagascar? But you can see the traffic crossings, the black and white paint, and we have them in the UK as well, and call them zebra crossings. And these guys are employed to hang around these crossings, and if they see people contravening the appropriate traffic regulations, so maybe encroaching on it before the light turns green before they can go, or tourists or visitors or even locals walking where they shouldn't, these zebras will just come up and, really? Okay. And it actually was introduced in Bogota, Colombia in the 1990s there. And before the pandemic in La Paz, tourists could actually pay to dress up as a zebra and spend a day helping manage traffic. So, it doesn't have to be aggressive and confrontational, is what I'm saying. But we need to think of ways of communicating with visitors much more. Planning management, lots and lots of different examples out there. Lovers Lane in Cinque Terre in Italy are going to basically limit the number of people who can go there. Similarly, Greece is going to introduce ticket sales or caps on ticket sales to the Acropolis. Now, it is a brave tourism professional who comes out and supports any measure to reduce the number of people who can enjoy that destination. But from a conservation perspective, a historic conservation perspective, it often makes sense. So we're seeing more and more of this. I mentioned earlier legislation in Mallorca and these €3,000 fines. If you are caught drinking in a public place, then you can be fined. And these are being enforced. And the level of fine is sufficient to, it only needs a few people to be caught, and the word gets around very, very quickly. And it begins to change people's perceptions of that destination. Rome, no swimming in the fountains, no paddling in the fountains, no eating on or near monuments. So lots of destinations are beginning to look at very specific challenges and introducing appropriate legislation. Airbnb, I know you've got issues here. I believe that there's some interesting ideas just been introduced about possibly just banning all Airbnb in New Orleans. New York, there was an article I read this morning about the impact that their current licensing is having on the supply of Airbnb. Edinburgh in Scotland, a real problem. They tried it, and the owners and the company fought back, ruled unlawful. Amsterdam has had some partial success regulating it. My own home city, my Member of Parliament, Rachel Maskell, was a bit tired of getting so many complaints from people about the impact Airbnb was having. She tried to introduce legislation in the House of Commons to try and get it licensed more fully. Sadly, that's failed. But I wish you success. I will admit I'm not a fan of Airbnb because it doesn't create jobs, or certainly not direct jobs. Developing community-based products, and this is, and I will show my ignorance, I'm not clear how much of this goes on already in New Orleans, but I just want to introduce some ideas from other places I've worked around the world. Gambia, chap in the middle from a village called Albreda. Those of you who remember Alex Haley's book Roots, or maybe the TV series, where he traced his ancestry back to Albreda and the neighboring village Joffre. And it became a destination for day visits for people staying in their resorts on the coast. And the communities at first said, we're getting no benefit. So they worked with an aid organization and a local heritage trainer to train up young, in this case they were actually all guys, to act as tour guides. So they saw some direct benefit, and they also felt they were presenting their home to tourists. They weren't relying on guides coming in from outside to do it. There's been lots of examples of working with disadvantaged communities to deliver guided tours. Unseen Tours in London, still operating, works with homeless people, trains them up as guides, and you go on a guide, and you see London from their point of view. Tales of City Tours was actually set up by one of my former students in Leeds, working with refugees and getting them to develop tours of the city that talked about the way they saw it. And I remember going on one, and it was an Afghan guy, and he stopped about the post office. He said, I'm not going to talk about the architecture. You all know what a post office does in the UK. But back home in Afghanistan, it's so often the only place we can go to get documents notarized. We may have to travel several days to go and register a birth or register a death or get something signed by a lawyer. So it performs a very, very different function in my country than it does in yours. So it's taking an aspect of the destination that we're looking at, but telling a different story. There are obviously also people who don't want to work in tourism. There may be good craft skills. This was a project in Saudi Arabia working with women who would produce the crafts, which were then sold through a central outlet to visitors who didn't want to engage, because the women actually weren't allowed to engage with visitors themselves. How do we get people to behave better? The liminal spaces, we've got to think about the functions and make it clear what we expect people to do there. So that's, again, changing behavior. Design interventions to affect behavior. We see lots of these around big cities in the UK. Look innocuous, but they're designed to stop rough sleeping. So it's stopping one type of behavior we think of inappropriate, but it is not solving the problem. It's only displacing it, and we need to think about that. These, if ever you go to London and walk around Fleet Street, which used to be the head of the newspaper industry, you might see these metal bars. They're about this height, and they come out at an angle. In the 19th century, there was a problem with public urination there. These are positioned at a height and an angle that if a man goes to pee against the wall, it splashes back on his trousers. He only does it once. If you run a hotel and you've got problems with people running up and down the corridors, buy a carpet like that. It will slow them down. So think about these small design interventions that you can do to adjust people's behavior. Should we try to change the image of a destination? And if you do, are you going to focus on different markets? Which ones? Are you going to look also at including peripheral areas that possibly presently don't get much tourism? And we're going to hear a little bit about how that's been happening in Cape Town. I just, give you an example, Glasgow. In the 1980s, the definition of a tourist in Glasgow was somebody who turned left instead of right when they were trying to get to Edinburgh. It's taken 20 years more to create a positive image as Glasgow as a destination. And that's everything through investment in infrastructure, in new museums, marketing, and the famous one always was Glasgow's miles better, or was it Glasgow smiles better? Glasgow 2023 gets something like 1.9 million tourists a year, up from almost zero a few years ago. And if we're going to do that, what is the role of the media? not just social media, but all the other. I believe that you've had something like 4 movies filmed here recently in the French Quarter. You know, are they going to be popular? If so, what image of New Orleans are they presenting? Are they likely to stimulate people to come and visit? And if so, do they want to go? I'm still desperate to find out where that scene in Live and Let Die was filmed. I think I've narrowed it down now. Somebody said on Chartres Street. So to conclude then, basically, the new normal is the old normal, whether that's for good or for bad. But I do think there is a lot of evidence that host communities around the world are less prepared to accept tourism as it has been in the past. They want tourism to develop on their own terms. The tools are out there to do it. And the industry itself, because it had to be creative in the early stages of the pandemic, is able and willing to be more innovative. And I think to work with a whole range of partners to move things forward. So thank you for listening. I hope, as I said, you've been entertained, enlightened, and if I may borrow my final 2 minutes, I promised you would see this more clearly. And this to me is a great example of innovation, creativity at a World Heritage Site where there were incredible restrictions on what was allowed to be done in terms of presenting the heritage. So it's at Housestead's Roman Fort on Hadrian's Wall in the north of England. World Heritage Site. It represents the northernmost boundary of the Roman Empire. And it was abandoned by the early 4th century. And obviously, you know, subsequent generations, why bother quarrying new stone when you can just steal stone from the existing fortifications? And we'd build houses and abbeys and churches and whatever. So, you know, I grew up in this part of the world, and as far as I was concerned, the Romans couldn't build anything higher than that platform because I'd never seen it. And many other people felt the same. So what English Heritage did, working with a public artist, was they said, okay, we're going to recreate one of these big towers, these watchtowers. We know what the dimensions would have been. Now, we can't recreate it in stone. We can't materially affect the foundations, what's left of the archaeological site. But what we can do is create a replica. And we're going to build it to the correct dimensions. We're going to put scaffolding inside and ladders so people can climb up and get a view from the landscape as a Roman soldier would have done 1900 years ago. But they also work with local kids to get a sense of ownership. And it's their words that appear on all these placards. So I would urge you all, whether you're in the tourism sector, whether in the historic preservation, conservation sector, to obviously understand each other's worlds and crucially understand what your residents are looking for, because it's only through that kind of partnership that we are really going to be able to build back better. Thank you for your time.
Now, we would like to bring in the on-the-ground perspective from popular tourist destinations that are on the surface foreign to us, but at the same time very familiar. These are 2 short virtual presentations. We will first hear from Enver Duminy, CEO of Cape Town Tourism. Cape Town Tourism took the pandemic as a chance to reset tourism in Cape Town, South Africa. Enver Duminy's work has been the catalyst for the rebirth of the tourism sector through educational initiatives and a focus on local economies. Then, we will hear from Maya Janssen, she's going to say that differently, Managing Director, Insights and Marketing Strategy for Amsterdam and Partners, who, post-pandemic, has been reimagining tourism in the Netherlands and looking to promote travel that embodies, in her words, freedom, but freedom with respect.
I'm Enver Duminy. I am Chief Executive Officer at Cape Town Tourism for, I think, just over a decade now. We are a public-private entity, which is one of very few in Africa. What makes us different and unique as a public-private entity is the fact that we have both the industry, the tourism industry, as well as government as partners. In fact, the way I describe Cape Town Tourism is we are the love child that was created when government and industry finally did something right. As many other destinations around the world, COVID has definitely had a significant impact, not only on travel to our destinations, but it's also had a significant impact on the tourism industry as well as the local population who are dependent on tourism as a livelihood. And I think the challenge for Cape Town was no different than any other destination in the fact that it was a balance and a trade-off sometimes between saving lives and saving livelihoods. But as much as that has happened, and we were fortunate enough to be able to protect the tourism industry to some extent, even though we didn't get significant government intervention when we looked at funding or keeping businesses around, we were relying on ourselves and each other as a tourism industry to support each other through literally 2.5 years of no visitation to low visitation. But with that being said, we also looked at the time during COVID as an opportunity to reset the tourism agenda. And what that meant is that when we do come out of COVID, and it was what we referred to as our tourism bounce back plan, we needed to make sure that we do things differently as a destination. I think what we had fallen into a trap as Cape Town was because we were having so much success in our brand awareness, in visitation numbers, we became complacent in what actually got us here as a destination. And that was purely based on what we refer to as our Responsible Tourism Charter, which we developed in 2004. So we're talking about going back almost 20 years ago when we understood the importance of sustainable and responsible tourism as a destination. And part of that journey was making sure that, one, besides looking after the environment, which I think a lot of destinations focus on when it comes to responsible tourism, what we focused on was more around the sustainability of communities that depend on tourism. And when we went into COVID, as much as we started focusing on ourselves as the industry, how do we protect ourselves, how do we sustain ourselves during the pandemic, one of the things that we always knew we needed to make sure of was that the communities that we work within as tourism operators, and that the communities that depend on us, we still need to make sure we look after them. And that was challenging in its own right. But I think that North Star allowed us to be able to not only get through COVID, but also to sustain that growth and development in partnership with communities since then, over the last, let's say, 2-3 years now, since kind of COVID has subsided. And programs that we focused on when we talk about destination management was community-based tourism. Cape Town and South Africa is no different in the sense that we have significant threats to our livelihoods and economic growth, which is poverty and unemployment. And we believe that tourism is the best catalyst to drive that change. And that meant that we needed to play a stronger role, not only during COVID in working with communities, but also seeing how we could bring communities into being part of the tourism experience. But what we also were reminded of during COVID was that domestic tourism was actually the savior of tourism, especially when we had severe lockdowns and restrictions around international flights to Cape Town. And what we had then told ourselves as a tourism industry is that when we get out of this pandemic, we would need to make sure that we continue to look after the domestic market and also make sure we work a lot closer with communities where beneficiation needs to go into. The challenge for Cape Town still remains its spatial planning, which is still built on a very old an apartheid system where the wealthy and the rich are in certain areas and the poor are in far-flung segregated areas. And what we do have is that a lot of people from what we call the favelas, the townships, the poorer communities, would be employed in tourism, but that would mean leaving their neighborhoods to go somewhere. And what we then developed was a program in partnership with the communities, which we refer to as the Neighborhood Development Program, where we said, well, as much as we know that people from communities are employed in the tourism sector, beneficiation doesn't necessarily go back into the community. It may go into a household or two where persons an employee of tourism, but we felt we need to make a significant step change as Cape Town Tourism. And what we then developed in partnership with the community of Khayelitsha, which has probably about 750,000 people living in that community, was to see how can we tell a different story of a destination, of a township, that doesn't focus on necessarily the poverty element of tourism. So we developed the Neighborhood Development Program in partnership with the community of Khayelitsha. And what it was focused on was, what does the community want to see in themselves when they want to be portrayed beyond the poverty perception?
So Khayelitsha, it's of course the biggest township this side of the city, and it is the fastest growing township in South Africa. There's a lot of opportunities, there's a lot of businesses that have been started in Khayelitsha. I think that's what brings more people to want to come and learn about how people are starting things from nothing and how people are trying to make a living out of these conditions that we are living in. It has a lot of entrepreneurs that are growing, a lot of organizations trying to change the narrative. And I would say for us, it was exactly that that gave us an opportunity to say we can start something and challenge what's happening already in our community and to try and bring about new experiences that would be authentic for people to be immersed in the township.
What we found was that even us as Cape Town Tourism, we weren't being genuine and authentic in how we promoted the destination, warts and all. And this experience of working with the community was humbling because we actually had to keep quiet and listen. Listen to what the community believes are their assets. Listen to a community and sharing their pain, which is also part of storytelling, but also their journey towards hope and what they are doing within the community. And for us, that means that our role as storyteller is not necessarily the one that writes the story. We are just a teller of that story. And therefore, we also need to shift our role as a DMO when we engage with communities. We can't be the hero in everything, and we realize that we needed to play a different role. We also need to allow the community to develop the products that they are proud of and how they want to position themselves. As many destinations start morphing and beginning to look and feel the same, one of the things that I believe for our future, when we talk about sustainable tourism, is preserving culture and heritage, because that's what's still unique to the origins of a destination. So culture, heritage needs to be preserved. And I know you guys in New Orleans, it's an important part of not just history, but the authenticity of your destination. And I think that's the one thing we always need to make sure we protect. As much as we focus on neighborhoods as a new form of attraction experience beyond the iconic stuff that our destination is known for, we also need to understand that tourism has to have a bright future. And part of Cape Town Tourism's mission, when we started engaging with high schools or secondary schools that teach tourism as a subject, which is also not a mandatory subject, it's optional. One of the things we discovered was that the curriculum that the kids were being taught was significantly outdated. I'm talking about probably 10, 15 years outdated. And what Cape Town Tourism had done in partnership with our members and partners was to create what we call the Future Tourism Leaders program. This is where we go into the schools where tourism is a subject. We bring in subject matter experts from the industry, but also people that are that come from the communities, that are maybe CIOs, CEOs, COOs of businesses or owners of businesses within the tourism space or from a hotel chain. And the strange thing is that they're all studying tourism, but they've never been a tourist in their own city. Some of them haven't even been up the iconic tabletop mountain that we have. Some of them haven't even been to the aquarium. And what we found was that we actually need to start getting these kids to experience their own city as a tourist. So what we do is on a quarterly basis, we let these kids go off and experience tourism, can stay in a hotel, go to an attraction. We're not yet as far as getting them onto a plane, but that's all something we're working on. But the intention is about getting them to understand tourism as a tourist. And by understanding that, when they get back to the curriculum, they will also now have updated information and content from practitioners in the space, along with seeing themselves and their future selves in the leaders that we brought in. But as we started working with the kids, we realized that also that the teachers that were teaching the subject have never studied tourism, were not tourism practitioners, have never even worked in tourism, which means that these kids and the teachers were actually left to figure things out and work off a curriculum to the best of their ability. And what we've established since then, besides the Future Leaders program, is now what we call the Tourism Teachers Think Tank. We will also have regular engagements with the captains of industry, and also having the teachers experience tourism and understanding the full depth and breadth of tourism, as a tourist, but also as a practitioner. So we find that the active engagements and practical platforms that we have created is starting to change the perception of tourism for the teachers, for the students. They can see that there's an opportunity for hope and a brighter future for them within the sector, and that they don't just end up in tourism by mistake, or if they are in tourism, they study it, that they don't just remain in the lower ranks of tourism as an employee, but someday they can even be that employer, owner, or CEO of a listed entity within tourism. And if there's one thing I can leave you guys with is that tourism will continue to be the opportunity that changes people's lives. It's a sector that is underestimated and underrated and seen as frivolous at times. But for those of us that are in the sector, we understand the immense amount of hard work that goes in to making sure that the experiences that people have, the memories that they have, is something that we've designed, implemented, and continue to make sure that these dreams get fulfilled every single day with every single visit, every single ticket, and every single experience. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maya Janssen, Managing Director, Insights and Marketing Strategy. I'm working at Amsterdam & Partners. Amsterdam & Partners has been around for about 20 years. All our activities are done under the brand name iAmsterdam, probably well known. And we strive for a sustainable visitor economy where residents can work, recreate, and live. But we are also able to welcome our visitors and our international business and talent in a hospital way. Well, visitors are a very important heritage of Amsterdam, and they brought us very much. They brought us jobs, income, culture amenities, but also a lot of creativity and diversity. But the livability of life in Amsterdam has been affected in the last couple of years. And that's because too much people, overcrowdedness, and antisocial behavior of certain groups in certain city districts. We had a great impact of the short-term rentals and the houses shortage for the locals. And of course, we had a very great impact on the retail and the shops, mainly in the city district and city center, with the mono offering, and then sort of the Nutella shops or the sweet shops are not very relevant for the locals. And then we had Corona, and Corona was for us a tipping point and showed us that the visitor economy was in a disbalance. And during Corona and after Corona, we asked ourselves, how can we start up the visitor economy again in a sustainable way? So not only from the economic part, but also from a social and ecological point of view. And we had a very big co-creation projects with residents, entrepreneurs, cultural institutions, knowledge institutions, and a lot of experts. And we talked about how we're going to do it. And we made a number of recommendations from the city to the city. And the first important one was that we had to start with a new image of the city. We have always been a city of freedom, but now we need to be, and still need to be, a city with freedom with respect, and respect for the residents and its surroundings. And it also was a main focus on the visitors who add value towards the city. Think about the conferences, the meetings, but also the leisure visits who are aimed at culture or the more authentic parts for the city. And if you look now, it was in the end of 2020, we had the recommendations finished. And we're now working on we have been working on a renewed story of Amsterdam, but also starting a image campaign at the end of this year aimed at residents, visitors, and businesses under the title Renew Your View on Amsterdam. We worked in the recommendations on the quality and the variety of our nightlife. Nightlife has always been very important for Amsterdam, just like cities of Berlin, and had a very big negative impact during Corona. So there's been a lot of emphasis on starting it up, a lot of money from the element into the sector, but also the main problem is, like a lot of cities, is finding enough physical space to have more nightlife. So it's really about finding space and real estate and relocation. So it's a very first step in getting Amsterdam more into the nightlife again. And for the nightlife, it's also very important to tackle the antisocial behavior of certain groups and the nuisance for the residents. And we have always been campaigning the last couple of years for enjoy, happy to come to Amsterdam, but respect towards the surroundings and the residents. But last year we started a more rude campaign, the Stay Away campaign, and it was not fully mentioned to change the behavior of certain groups. It was mainly aimed at young visitors coming from, for example, German, in this case the British, who come to Amsterdam only for the booze and the drugs. Changing the behavior is a hard task long term. It was mainly a signal also to other cities and to the politics that we have to do about people coming only to the city for having a good stag party or and not for the things we want them to come from.
Amsterdam is a popular tourist destination. Visitors travel from near and far to experience its cultural attractions, architecture, vibe, and restaurants. Some visitors do not come just for the city, though. Rather, they only visit to party excessively. This type of behavior has become an increasing annoyance for locals and business owners, and it makes certain parts of the city less livable. That is unacceptable. This is why Amsterdam Marketing is launching a major campaign to tackle public disturbances caused by this misconduct. The goal is to increase awareness about what is or isn't allowed in the city by presenting good behavior as freedom of choice. From where to put your litter to public behavior, from drinking alcohol to going to the toilet. But who are they exactly? Who are we talking to in this campaign? There isn't just one single type of nuisance visitor, but there is a certain group that comes here specifically to party excessively without concern of consequences. We are talking mainly about male visitors between the ages of 18 to 34 years old from the Netherlands and the UK. The campaign will be visible to them from the very beginning, when trips are being planned, right through to them actually going out in town.
The last thing, I think it's an interesting recommendation, is make the inner city of Amsterdam really attractive again for the locals. I've been a citizen from birth, and I haven't been in the city center I'm not very often in the city center because it has nothing to offer, too crowded, not interesting shops. So there has been a lot of effort from the local government, from the real estate, from entrepreneurs, changing the inner city. And for example, now the Zeedijk is changed, more room for living, but also more room for the smaller entrepreneurs. There've been a lot of fashion brands who have been starting their business over there. For example, the Patas or the New Originals. There's been a lot of attention for the public environment, the public domain, more green, less cars, more pedestrians, more guerrilla gardening by the residents itself, and more attention for the sustainability overall, so less litter, less rubbish, and more quietness. So I think they're all part of a long-term approach, and in 2025 we are hoping to celebrate the 750th birthday of Amsterdam and to show some of the results we have achieved. But to be honest, I think it's a long-term approach, and it will take the next coming years to pay attention to a more sustainable Vista economy.
Okay, it's now my great pleasure to welcome Walt Leger to join us. We're very grateful to you, Walt, for joining us today, and really looking forward to your contribution to the program. Walt Leger III is President and CEO of New Orleans & Company. Representing over 1,100 member businesses, New Orleans & Company is the tourism and hospitality industry's official destination sales, marketing, and trade organization, responsible for driving billions of dollars of diverse annual business to the regional cultural economy. In a highly competitive global environment, the organization works to attract leisure and cultural travel, business meetings, conventions, and sporting and special events, while celebrating the richness of the city's culture and enhancing the quality of life for every New Orleanian. Please join me in welcoming Walt.
Thank you, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think after hearing the words from our colleagues from around the world and also from Simon this morning, I feel like I could go on for hours, but I have 5 minutes. So I'm going to try to go as quickly as I possibly can with this 55-page PowerPoint that I have. But ultimately, I probably will end up just kind of running through that just so you can see it, and mostly just kind of talking and thinking about the ways that our city is so connected to the two that we just heard from. So I want to commend our partners and thank them for inviting me to be here. VCC, VCPORA, the Historic New Orleans Collection, obviously really important partners of ours in a number of different ways over the years, and will continue to be important partners as we move forward. You picked wisely. You chose the cities wisely because there are so many things that I think we share in common, and so much work that we're doing that's similar to the work that's being done there. I don't have to tell you how negatively impacted this industry has been over the last couple of years and how challenging that has been for the city and for the state of Louisiana because of the economic impact that this industry has. Fortunately, the federal government and the state government provided support that made up for the dramatic loss of revenue, because in fact, the revenue created by the tourism industry in the city of New Orleans accounts for about 50% of all revenue that funds city operations. That has been something that has been, I think, something that many locals are not particularly proud of, and it's probably something that we shouldn't be proud of. I tell people often that our goal is to help stimulate and develop a more diversified economy so that the tourism economy is not the most important economic driver in our city. It can become the third or the fourth most important driver in our city. It continue to be successful, but ultimately benefit from those other industries and the spending that happens in those. There's so many things that have been touched upon. I may not even go through this slideshow. I wanted to kind of just dive straight in. You know, I was taken aback a little bit by Simon's presentation on the perception of our city, because it's precisely what I've always seen as the perception of our city. And as a lifelong resident and someone who calls this place home, I've struggled with it for as long as I can remember. This city is a source of incredible pride for me. The French Quarter is a beautiful place, an incredible neighborhood, and an important personal, has an important personal part to play in my life. I tell people often that I hear stories of people who have moved to New Orleans and they talk about that moment that they fell in love with the city. And I have often felt like I was cheated, because I've been in love with the city since I was born, and I never got to have that moment. But I also tell people that when I do have a moment that is close to that, it is often when I am in the French Quarter. And it's usually on a beautiful day, not unlike today. I've probably been in one of our fine restaurants, enjoyed myself with great company, have walked out of that restaurant and strolled through the beautiful architecture and kind of looked up in the sky and just said, this is the most magical place in the world. There's no other place like it. However, there is a perception of music, cuisine, history, culture, hospitality, welcoming hospitality, authenticity, that I think we're proud of, but there's also a side of that that paints us in a light that doesn't capture the full beauty of what this city is and the creativity and the innovation that this city has brought to the world. And so, much like some of the other cities have talked about, that is what we have been trying to bring in my last 9 months. I've been in this role for 9 months. So we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of things that we want to accomplish, and we're moving quickly in accomplishing those things. But I've only been with the company since 2020, literally about 2 months before COVID shut everything down. And in that time have sort of tried to position us in a way that does allow us some space to create a new narrative about our city. When we talk about sustainable tourism in the city of New Orleans, and we talk about the best way to achieve it for the benefit of the community, the thing that I think sets us up for so much success has always been present. The most sustainable type of tourism that we can have in this community are conventions, conferences, and meetings. It's also something that we're positioned to compete for at a very high level, and we are traditionally among the most preeminent destinations in the country to do that. The reason why it works for us is it's less visitors who spend more money and who work with more businesses across our community to bring economic impact to more people across our community. When we have 25,000 hematologists in town, they're different than 25,000 people who are here for a bachelor party. And unlike Amsterdam, I'm not going to throw all 18-year-old men under the bus, because we also know that we have a lot of bachelorette parties. So, and look, they're welcome here. Everyone's welcome here. That's part of what New Orleans is and the beauty of our great city. And it's going to be a part of our city, because ultimately we'll never escape some of the perception that exists about the freedom and the fun and the vibrancy of what our city is, nor should we want to escape that. We've all partaken in that in some way or another, and we all benefit from that in some way or another, because it does make us culturally diverse and rich in what we have to offer. But we are much more than a city of music and food and celebration. We're a city of creativity and innovation, and that's the story that we've been working to tell. One, because it resonates with our professional customers, our corporate customers, and the ones that we want to be here to have meetings, conferences, and events. But two, because it's true. There's a reason the World War II museum's here in the city of New Orleans. It's because of the innovation of the Higgins boat that helped to win World War II. But we fail to tell that story. NASA's building a rocket that's going to take the next person to the moon, and it's going to be a person of color and a woman. And we've been building rockets for decades now. And we don't celebrate that enough. We care about preservation. We invest in preservation. As a state, as a city, we work towards preserving the past, celebrating our history, but also moving forward into the future. And that's recognized by the fact that no state and no city leverages historic tax credits better than the state of Louisiana and the city of New Orleans with state and federal benefit. Much of that has taken properties that were otherwise out of commerce and put them back into commerce, oftentimes as accommodations that help to foster the tourism industry. So we have historic preservation happening because of visitorship. We're also a center of innovation around coastal resiliency, hurricane protection, how to rebuild coastlines, and developing the alternative energy and decarbonization technology that's needed for a more sustainable world. But what have we been working on specifically? And I'll get to that quickly so that we can get to the questions and answer. We want to make sure that we maintain New Orleans as the greatest and most special and unique city in the world. In order to do that, it's got to be a great place to live. And so every day our team is focused on trying to enhance cleanliness, public safety, address homelessness challenges, work with our partners at the city and with NOPD to try to provide additional resources that bring more public safety resources into your community, working with the state to try to bring additional public safety resources into your community and into your neighborhood. We've been extremely focused on accelerating our positive public relations strategies, and that involves bringing journalists here from all over the world, but also working with social media influencers. I hope we'll get a chance to talk a little bit about that with Simon during the kind of panel discussion, but that's a critical way to shape the narrative around what our city is. Like it or not, social media is where people are consuming information. There's only so much that you can possibly do as a destination marketing organization to tell a story. You need other people to do it. I travel all the time. I've been on the road for 100 days this year already, promoting and selling our city. We sell it hard, and we push really hard to get people to come here and be with us and experience the great things New Orleans has. But at the end of the day, I get paid to do that. We've got to be able to bring in journalists and influencers who can tell that story from a third-party perspective and influence the outcome in a different way. And so inspiring travel for the benefit of our community requires us to work really hard on the PR front. Sustainability. We've started a few programs and partnered with others to create programs around recycling and around reducing waste that I don't think our community's ever seen in the past. This past Mardi Gras, we launched a program with the city called Recycle That, which recycled thousands of pounds of waste from Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras is a critical cultural celebration in our community. We all recognize that. But at the end of the day, the waste that we're creating is unacceptable. We're buying a bunch of garbage from China and pouring it into our streets each year. And if we don't address it, the rest of the world's going to address it, and they're going to stop coming. And so we're pushing really aggressively to get that waste reduced and to deal with the waste that's being created, working with local entrepreneurs and other organizations who are promoting more sustainable throws and other items. We've worked with our hotel community and restaurant community on a zero waste challenge with Life City that's been highly successful, continues to promote sustainable practices in businesses across the community. We've worked with the convention center to have them LEED certified. They're the first convention center in North America of their size and of their age to be able to achieve that distinction. That is not insignificant, it's important, and it's meaningful. Over the last couple of years, I'm also proud to have worked with U.S. Travel as an executive board member to found a new summit called the Future of Travel Mobility Summit, where we focus on the entire travel industry from start to finish and on how to make it more sustainable, how to work towards more implementation of sustainable jet fuel, for example, how to work with shore power and other things in the cruise industry to improve the pollution and other issues that are created in that space. But we have a lot more work to do. I'll finish by saying this. I appreciate being with you. There is a lot more that we could talk about today about where we're going, but suffice it to say, New Orleans has a bright, bright future, regardless of how any of us feel on a day-to-day basis about some of the things that we think are lacking. There is great love for our community. There is great respect for our community. We're going to continue to work with you and others to make sure that the people who come here respect our culture, respect our community the way that we want them to. And we're currently involved in a program that I think will be really impactful, and we're going to call on all of you to be a part of it. In 2009, the tourism industry did a master plan that they developed and said, these are the things that we need as a community to have a more successful tourism industry. They said, we need a new airport. Well, we built a new airport, one that we should all be very proud of. It continues to be recognized nationally and globally for the great work that they're doing there. Said we needed to redevelop the riverfront. We've achieved some of that, but we have a lot more work to do there. It said that we needed to clean up the French Quarter. Well, clearly we have a lot more work to do there. It said that we needed to have more public safety. Well, we've had times in the past where we had better public safety. We're going to get there again. There was a great article in the paper this morning talking about positive momentum there. It said we needed to build, that we know that there are other things we need to do, but we also know that designing a new master plan for tourism is not the right approach. And so what we're doing is we're going to begin developing a vision plan for our community, and we're going to ask partners across the community to join in with us on that, because we truly believe that if we design a community that we all can be proud of, that we're all happy with, and that we all have opportunity in, then we'll always be a compelling place for people to visit. We need to become a more accessible community. And our company is working with people across the community to identify and improve ways that we can address the challenges. The French Quarter has many challenges as it relates to accessibility. We have historic structures that are exempt from ADA requirements. We understand that, but there are things that have to be done to improve that so that everyone can truly be welcome. So as we go through this visioning program that we intend to be prepared for by 2025, I hope that you'll join us in helping to paint that vision, understanding that us all working together will get us to where we ultimately need to go. So if you want these slides, I'll send them to you, but I think we were better off just talking today. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I look forward to visiting with you later.
So we're going to just take a minute to set the stage up, and then I've been given the opportunity to ask Walt a few questions. Sadly for me, he's already answered the first one, and my first one was 18-year-old Simon right? Is not New Orleans just sex, drugs, and rock and roll? And I think
No, more than
okay, but I love this idea of creativity and innovation, and certainly it's opened my eyes to the potential. But if the chairs are ready, then we can get cracking. So my second question, and Walt actually also began to talk.
I'll be happy to address that more. I mean, I wouldn't mind adding to it.
Okay,
Look, at the end of the day, there's so many things about New Orleans that are complicated, and that it's too hard to paint it with a 30-second commercial. And that's why it's so hard and to fight back some of the perceptions that there are. I mean, as I travel around, and this has been something I've experienced my whole life, people say, oh, you're from New Orleans. Wow, tell me about Mardi Gras. And I tell them that it's fantastic. It's one of the most special times of year for families to get together on the neutral ground and cook and spend time together. And little kids are in the street throwing the football, and families are enjoying themselves. And the ritual and the culture is this festive environment where you get together year in and year out and spend time together. And they look at me like I'm crazy because they think that Mardi Gras is just a bunch of half-naked people on Bourbon Street in costumes. And that's 10% of it, maybe less. The vast majority of Mardi Gras is a family celebration that's lived over and over from year to year in a, ritualistic way that makes people feel at home and welcomes people who come to visit into their families. And so, it's amazing how often I talk to people who are like, well, I didn't make it when I was 22 and in college, so I guess I'll never make it to Mardi Gras. And I say, well, then you're missing the whole point. And so New Orleans is a lot more than those things, but New Orleans also does benefit from this rich imagination that it's captured across the globe. And so it's a really difficult balance to kind of try to find a way to capitalize on an image that it means so much to so many people, while also trying to introduce them into all the deeper ways they can connect to the city.
And I think that's really one of the benefits of using the media however you can, as you say, to communicate these different messages. And so my next question, and you did begin to talk about this, was your work with social media influencers in particular, because I've got mixed experience of working with them myself. One of my students actually still works as an influencer, has reasonable success. She's a plus size model working in tourism with the Finnish market, so very, very specific. But I've seen a lot of examples where it's gone quite badly. So could you tell us a little bit more about?
Yeah, so look, this is fascinating to me. I'm not a marketer. That's not my background. I'm a lawyer, and I was a politician before I became a tourism official. But I think there's a lot of things that are actually in common with all of that. And as a lawyer, you're required to build a case, and you use evidence to build your case. You're also subject to ethical rules and ethical standards and all of these other things that are really, central to what it means to be a lawyer. And I've asked our team on the marketing front, I've often asked them, I'm like, is it ethical to target specific people with, specific groups of people with a specific influencer? Because it just kind of feels funny. But I think all is fair in marketing. And so what the influencer gives you is this unique opportunity to touch a truly specific segment of the community with a truly specific individual. So we're working with a lot of influencers, and are they all great experiences? I mean, probably not. I mean, I'm not aware of any disasters that we've had, but we've had some that have been highly successful. We've had some that have been marginally successful. But the opportunity at a relatively low cost to be able to reach a very specific audience with a very specific message is invaluable. And I believe that most organizations like ours are doing this now. If they're not, they're committing malpractice. I mean, it's where people are getting information, like it or not. TikTok and Instagram, those are the places where things are happening and decisions are being made across all demographics. And so, we're definitely working on that. We've actually doubled our budget this year on public relations, including our budget on influencers, because I just don't believe that traditional commercials running on, whatever people are watching, streaming services or television are effective. And so we're working really hard in that way.
Thank you. So moving on and back to the academic stuff very, very briefly, and debates about authenticity and heritage. And we heard Enver talk about authenticity of the tourism product. One of the things that struck me, I was given a guided tour of the French Quarter yesterday morning by some conservation heritage professionals. And I saw it through very, very different eyes than when I was here 10 years ago as a tourist. But I wonder whether you've got, New Orleans and Company has any evidence that the average visitor to the French Quarter really understands what they're looking at, or would they be happy with a pastiche that almost recreated the feel, but was more designed in the same way that Maya from Amsterdam was talking about, finding the space to develop nightlife. Could we develop a replica French Quarter or Bourbon Street on a disused dockyard?
Yeah, I think nothing upsets New Orleanians more than that concept, right? I mean, we don't like the kind of mock Disney version of New Orleans, right? And I think if you walk out on the streets right now, the French Quarter, if nothing else, it's authentic. I mean, it's got authentic smells, it's got authentic flavors, it's authentic. I'll tell you this, what we need to do is create more spaces in the city where people can spend time and recreate that visit our city. That's not by recreating Bourbon Street or the French Quarter. I mean, the French Quarter is the French Quarter. What we need to be doing is what Daniel said at the beginning, which is focusing on creating a different feeling in the French Quarter that welcomes people to experience cultural things and experience the architecture and, of course, the tours and everything else. But we have opportunities now. You know, there's a 40-acre site north of the convention center along the river that's being developed right now called the River District. It will be a new neighborhood in our city that will be designed to have entertainment space and have restaurants and hotels and other accommodations, leading with housing and affordable housing, which is critical for our community. This is something that we've needed for a long time. There's too much pressure on the French Quarter to begin with. We need people to spend time in other places. So that's on the way and that's happening. There'll be really exciting announcements next week about the beginning of some of the construction and some of the commitments that have been made there. Riverfront development down at the other end on Governor Nichols Wharf with a permanent festival ground that we've partnered with Audubon and with the convention center to construct, almost under construction, waiting a final approval from the city, bringing people back to the riverfront, and then also Spanish Plaza, which is near our aquarium, under new ownership and under new development that also creates a new, space for people. So I don't think we need to recreate. As far as data goes, I think we have plenty of visitors who very much appreciate the architecture and the authenticity of the French Quarter, and I think we have a bunch of visitors who are happy to be on Bourbon Street drinking huge beers. And, interestingly, when you look at it, we benefit from a lot of drive distance visitors, and those people are from Mississippi and Alabama and North Louisiana and Texas, and we don't market to them to come drink beers on Bourbon Street. We don't have to. They've seen the movies and they've heard the music, and they drive in and they're here a lot. So whether they appreciate that or not, I think they're probably our audience that appreciates it less. Mm-hmm. But I think there are plenty that come here very much because they appreciate the history of our city.
Yeah. So it sounds from what you're saying there that the beginning to spread the load and move tourists to other parts of the city. As a geographer, that I find that
that's
really
critical.
Yeah,
it's
cool.
We're not a big city. We're
Yeah.
geographically landlocked, surrounded by water, and ultimately a relatively small area. But the failure to have created new opportunities for people has been a challenge, and I think addressing it's really important. We also see, I think, continued growth in places like Mid-City and City Park and Magazine Street and Uptown and the Garden District, where more and more people are being attracted, and we're intentionally trying to accomplish that. We also are trying to accomplish getting people into places around New Orleans. In the past, I think there was a really big focus on get them downtown and keep them downtown. That's not what people are looking for. And when they can have a really diverse experience in St. Bernard or in Plaquemines or in Jefferson Parish, that's different than what they can get here, but they can still benefit from the great city of New Orleans. We want to make that happen for them because I think those are the things that make people want to come back and have deeper experiences with our community.
Yeah, thank you. So a couple more questions. One of the things that struck me in the presentation from Cape Town was the work that the Destination Management Organization is doing with local school kids and college kids. And I just wondered, do you have any similar programs here, or is it something that you'd like to develop?
Yeah, no, it looks like a great program. What I'd like to do is go dig into the curriculum after having him speak, because we've had a curriculum in place. We do it in partnership with the Hotel Lodging Association. We're in a number of different high schools, and our team goes into the high schools specifically and performs some of the work with the curriculum. We also bring a lot of our members and leaders of various restaurants and hotels in to do that kind of work. So I'd like to look at the curriculum because maybe it's outdated, as he suggested. We're also partnering with a local restaurateur over the next couple of years to do some work in Cape Town, interestingly. We're sending, they've been doing some hospitality training in Cape Town with the hope of recruiting J1 visa workers into our industry. And we're going to partner with them the next few years to create a more extensive program, be able to attract some people and build some New Orleans ambassadors in Cape Town and throughout South Africa.
Cool. So one final question then, and this is where I'm kind of asking on behalf of particularly most of the people in the audience here. If you had one message for the 3,500 residents of the French Quarter who are effectively hosting your 90 million tourists a year, what would it be?
It would probably be two things.
Okay.
Thank you, and I'm sorry. No, look, I mean, we need partners, and we appreciate that the residents of this neighborhood are the ones that have protected it as much as they possibly could for a very long time. And so now it's time for us as a broader community to do more, and we can only do that in partnership. So, you know, thank you for protecting what you could, and now let's see what we can protect together as we go forward. Certainly, as we keep working on this short-term rental issue, that I think is really an existential issue and a complicated one. And clearly, we're going to have to work our way through the courts repeatedly before we get it right. But appreciate the efforts of so many people in the room to try to make a difference on that, and we'll continue to work in partnership with them.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So we've done the hard work for the last hour and a half. It's now over to you guys to do the hard work of getting through all the food and drink that I believe is waiting for us outside. You will obviously have the opportunity to talk to Walt, to Daniel, to Aaron, to Brooke, to myself, network amongst yourselves. But can I thank you all once again for coming along this afternoon. I hope you found it interesting, rewarding, and I look forward to reading a scoreline that's positive for the Saints tomorrow, and certainly better than the one that England achieved today. Thank you.